Hello, 8th grade. This is Mrs. Politsky again, and I've got your notes for Chapter 16, Section 3, Succession and War. Civil War, that is. So let's get into this and talk about the election of 1860, a really crazy election. Four presidential candidates representing kind of the two major parties and a couple of minor parties that kind of popped up because of this friction about war. So the issue of slavery caused the Democratic Party to split before the election of 1860. A northern wing of the Democratic Party chose Stephen A. Douglas from the great state of Illinois to be their candidate. And if you remember him, he was all about popular sovereignty and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Because of that, there were some people that did not like this man. The Southern Democrats, they chose John Breckinridge as their candidate, a man from the Deep South. Probably had more in common with the slaveholders down there. They selected him. Moderates in the North and in the South, they formed the Constitutional Union Party, who did not take a position on the issue of slavery, and thus they nominated John Bell. But wait, there is this dark horse, a Republican. His name is Abraham Lincoln, and he is going to run. And if you look at the map that I have here, this is kind of the breakdown of the Electoral College in 1860. Note states that are kind of out in the middle of the country, like Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, so on, didn't really get to vote because they were territories. Missouri, if you note that, this is a state that is going to vote for Stephen A. Douglas. If you look at Iowa, they are, along with a lot of other states in the North, are going to vote for Abraham Lincoln, along with Oregon and California. Down in the Deep South, you've got Breckinridge winning Texas and pretty much anything that is going to be in the Deep South. They're going to vote for him. And if you're in the border state areas, Bell. Okay, so Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia. Note that Virginia at this moment in time is not split between West Virginia and just plain old Virginia. Maryland is kind of a split state. There's some that are going to vote for Breckinridge, some that are going to vote for Bell. Nobody voting for Abraham Lincoln. Delaware voting primarily for Bell. Okay, kind of aligning itself with the South. So it's kind of a crazy election if you take a look at that. So Republicans, they nominated Abe Lincoln, who promised to keep slavery where it existed, but to ban slavery in the new territories. Abraham Lincoln won the election of 1860. Part of it is because we had so many different candidates. The North having a pretty big population where they did not divide themselves like they did in the South. This gave them an advantage. And where a lot of them were voting Republican, Abraham Lincoln is the guy with the advantage. Though I should say, Abraham Lincoln, when the campaign started, was a dark horse. He was not the guy that most people thought was going to run. Matter of fact, if you look at the photo, Abraham Lincoln is kind of gawky. I mean, he's awkward looking. He is not what I would call ruggedly handsome. He's just kind of there, okay? I don't think he's going to win any beauty contest. But because of his position on the issue of slavery, he had a lot of supporters. And because the Republican National Convention happened to just take place in Chicago, Illinois, he had a lot of supporters in his home state, and they made sure that he won the nomination in Chicago. Some people might say there might have been a little corruption happening there, but it doesn't matter. The man wins, and he is going to get elected president. So he failed to get a single electoral vote in the South, but that shouldn't come as any Surprise, because of his position on slavery, okay? Angered Southerners believed that abolition and rebellion of enslaved people would follow this election of Abraham Lincoln. And so on December 20th, 1860, the lovely state of South Carolina voted to secede. And it was crazy. It was pandemania. They were in the city of Charleston. They were partying it up, hooting and hollering because they had just pulled off the craziest comeback to the 1860 election by opting to drop out of the United States. A lot of people were concerned because there was a military fort in Charleston Harbor, Fort Sumter. And eventually that is going to be where some of the first, I guess you could say, bullets are going to be fired in this war. So, as other southern states debated secession, Senator John Crittenden of Kentucky, kind of coming from a divided state, a moderate state of Kentucky, proposed a plan to protect slavery in the territories south of 30 degrees north latitude, or aka the Mason-Dixon line, goes back to the Kansas-Nebraska or the Missouri Compromise. And Republicans rejected Crittenden's compromise. Okay, this was something that was happening in Congress in Washington, D.C., in that period of time after the November election, but before Lincoln is inaugurated. By February 1st, 1861, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia had all voted to secede, and they were starting to form a new country. Okay, these seceded states called themselves the Confederate States of America, or the CSA, and they elected Jefferson Davis of the state of Mississippi as their president. Okay, initially, we're going to be looking at a situation where we need to figure out where we're going to put a capital. When they were voting down, and I think in Montgomery, Alabama. This is all going to move up to Richmond, Virginia, as far as where we're going to seat the Confederate government. Very, very close to D.C., okay? So Southerners justified secession with the theory of states' rights. They believed that they had voluntarily chosen to enter the Union back, in the time of the Constitutional Convention, back in the time of the Articles, and defined the Constitution as a contract among the independent states. They also believed that the national government had broken the contract by refusing to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act and by denying Southern states equal rights in the territory. They also argued that it was their right to leave the Union. So, when this war starts off, there's a lot of questions. Is this a war against slavery or a war to keep the Union together? And it's all a matter of how you spin it. But I think really, if you look at the whole situation, the one issue that it boils down to is slavery. Okay, so if anybody tries to trick you and say, oh no, the Civil War was not about slavery, they're wrong. It was. So, after the election of 1860, outgoing President James Buchanan, who you see kind of on the left side doing the tightrope walk on the Mason-Dixon line, if you read the caption there, sent a message to Congress stating that Southern states had no right to secede from the Union. That sounds kind of impressive, like he's trying to take a stand, which is kind of a little too late because the election had taken place. For the most part, he's an outgoing president with not a lot of power. Yeah, just doesn't make a lot of sense that he's now taking a stand. Abraham Lincoln is going to be inaugurated in March of 1861, and during his inaugural address, he said that secession would not be permitted, vowing to hold federal property in the South and to enforce the nation's laws. In other words, Hey, Southerners, I hear that you're trying to take over U.S. forts in the South, and that's U.S. property. And you better watch out because the U.S. is going to come and try to protect its property. So, Confederate troops demanded the surrender of Fort Sumter, which is in Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. Not necessarily really all that important of a fort, to be quite honest. It kind of sits at the mouth of the harbor. A lot of ships would have to pass by it, but it's kind of one of those places where it just happens to be the place where things happen. And the fort, the U.S. fort, was on an island. It was guarding Charleston. The people of Charleston, being fired up when they seceded, being the first state that seceded, they were the ones putting pressure on this fort. The officers that had been occupying it at the time that secession came about and Abraham Lincoln was installed as president, were basically told to keep the fort. They were ordered to protect it at all cost. And as the Confederates started mobilizing, they started aiming cannons at this thing. So there were soldiers and some of their families. So you had some civilians in there. They were running out of supplies. It was just a real rotten situation for them to be in. So in response to this attack, President Lincoln sent an unarmed expedition with much-needed supplies to the fort. And as they tried to approach, they were attacked. Okay, that's just kind of as simple as it was. And they had to make a decision. If they were being shot at, they needed to start protecting themselves, and they started shooting at the Confederates. And nevertheless, this is how the war begins. So, on April 12, 1862, Confederate guns opened fire on the fort. The Union garrison, those are the people that are holding this fort, held out for 33 hours before surrendering on April 14, 1861. Following the attack, President Lincoln issued a call for 75,000 troops, to fight and save the Union, starting the Civil War. Now, 75,000 troops is not a lot of troops, and there are going to be more that are going to be needed very soon. So, thank you very much.